All right. So, my apologies. It's actually Tuesday, and reset day was yesterday. Merry Christmas, right, to all who observes yesterday and plus or minus half a day ish, right, depending on your time zone. So here we are. Today is this week's reset. Last time, the reset ended on a milestone, and that milestone was just to add the other weekly, which is the Defense of the Moon Dancer setup, right? And that's it. Oh, and last time they also did the scaling for the Invasion weekly, which turned out to be, I had a few choice words about that. It's expensive. Like when something is outrageously expensive, as in time, cost of time, and you reduce it by 60%, if it's outrageously expensive, well, it's less expensive now. Unfortunately, it's still relatively outrageously expensive when compared to other time, time value. So we basically ignored Invasion once again. And that's usually how I feel about some of the scaling in general. It's just not wide enough holistically. And it holds true for the way quality of life things are done. It's often incredibly compartmentalized to the point where it has no perspective on the whole. Like the adjustments to Sentinel, which is part of this module, right? Where it's done in isolation, as opposed to, in my opinion, the changes are done largely in isolation, as opposed to having a greater grasp of the scope of the changes. And then last week was the rogue changes, which were clearly done in isolation too, because there will be some choice words if you were to be someone who played a lot of different pain-giving classes. Anyways, it's sufficient. I don't, when your class gets more variety, most certainly that's wonderful. And definitely do not want to diminish what it succeeded at doing. The rogue patches last week. This week, there are no changes. At least no noticeable changes. There was a change that I noticed, which I'm going to demonstrate here. But it's happened earlier. It's not this specific week. But the defense animation was changed. And I don't know when specifically. I think it might have been 2 weeks ago. So before, it's just the left hand. The left hand of the character only lifts up their shield, right? It's even more subtle than this before. And now they reinstated the right hand being up in the air. And personally, from me, like, this is probably a minor opinion, but I think this is silly looking. This animation is incredibly silly looking. I was actually personally a fan of the subtle shield lift. The thing that I was concerned about is that there's still a cast time or cooldown on the shield animation. So it's not instantaneous, right? Even if you add the extra gross movement, it might look and feel as responsive as the animation now. It's a little bit closer. So that's fine. I guess that's a game. But this looks silly. Like, when you think of a warrior, in my opinion, obviously, when it comes to investigating animation, this is an incredibly silly position. I mean, functionally, though, it's very noticeable now. So on a functional state, you can definitely tell when you're guarding. And it was a little bit, I agree, if we were talking about pragmatically, it's a little difficult to know if you're blocking or not when they changed the blocking animation. For specifically Vanguards and Justicars and Oathkeepers, right? But now this guy just looks like a goober. Like, that is a very goober. This is a very, very goober thing. Like, I can, and then depending on like the length of your weapon, just to demonstrate even further gooberness, things clip, right? So now things clip as well. So in case people are interested in fashion over function, this is very goobery. Like, this guy looks very comically not ready for combat. I mean, that's a personal aesthetic choice. However, mechanically and functionally, it's very clear when you're guarding now. That's fair. Personally, though, the really fast guarding, I want it to be functionally responsive without a cooldown. So when you hit shift and you let go of shift and engage it again, I don't want to see that like 200 millisecond response time. Like, you can't engage it. To me, it should be instantaneous, so you don't actually have to know if you're guarding or not, because you're pulling it up, you know? So that's kind of the idea. So you're always pulling it up when you know you're pulling it up. However, that's not true here. So I think overall, functionally, this animation change is closer to what the responsiveness in the guarding mechanics are. So regardless of my personal taste on how this looks, functionally, I think it's a bit more lined up with the responsiveness, because the hand drops and then you're visually thinking, oh, you have to wait till the hand drops before you can guard again, and that lines up with the cooldown, the internal cooldown. But and to demonstrate the internal cooldown, you can tap like 4 times before the person lifts. So the cooldown and the animation lines up now, which was what it used to be like. So looks, so functionally is great that it's lined up, but he looks like a goober. Like, I can't overlook the idea that this is incredibly goobery. It's kind of charming in its way, but this reminds me of a Leroy Jenkins than a Paladin, personally, right? Like, this is more like a Leroy's Jenkins. Okay. Shoutouts to World of Warcraft, I suppose. Let's make sure this did translate to... I'm not sure if it's Vanguard. So let's quickly look at Vanguard. Yeah. So Vanguard does this too. So basically the goobery, like... I mean, like, I'm gonna tell you now. Try doing that with your hands. Like, just try doing that with your hands. Man, your delts, like, you're like just I can't over, and then you're running like this. Oh my gosh. Oh yeah, and good luck, Scoop. Yeah, good luck. Enjoy your OS session, Scoop. I always appreciate hanging out. And I hope your meal is good. Wow, did you eat already? Wow, that's fast. Right, so yeah, so he looks like a goober. So the Vanguard looks like a goober. Now, it's not the same for the Sentinel. The Sentinel already looks like a goober to begin with. So, and I doubt it changed at all. And the reason why I don't know right now is because I haven't been playing the Sentinel because of the asinine changes for the module, right? Like the really incredibly tone deaf module changes to Sentinel. So let me go switch, which I can't switch here for whatever reason. So is there a campfire here? What the heck? I'm guessing it's this thing. Okay. So let's so Sentinel, yeah, no change to Sentinel because it already oh wait, actually no, it's the same. So this is a new animation since the first module, and I kind of like it because it looks unique. I like it. I like that it looks dynamic. He still looks like a goober though. And then it doesn't help that my sentinel is a halfling. It's the smallest halfling, but he still looks like a goober. However, it looks less weird than before, which basically they place a fixed animation while holding it across, right? So I like this, and it's dynamic. Like if you hold it, the motion actually changes. Like there's different states of the defending. So I do enjoy this, and this hasn't changed at all. The other two look like fantastic goobers, for better or for worse. Right. So now let's go and do our normal like routine. Nothing has changed today. Today is the the non-milestone is the bye week. And then we won't know what happens at 800 if it's functionally dealing with earning currency until the next one. Because generally I stop right at the weekly haul. So let's go through our 3 tunes. Just to talk about something that I noticed, I suppose. It wasn't necessarily this week. It was 2 or 3. It might have been 2 weeks ago. I just forgot to mention that they edited the guarding animation for Vanguard and Justicars and Oathkeeper. Yep. Alright. So, I'm gonna ignore the invasion again. And this time, I think we need 25 extra because activities was a turn-in. It was a bye week for activity. Migration last turn. Still faster than invasion. And then we migrated 2 daily, 2 repeatables. So let's see, 50. So we're gonna start with 60 after these 2. And 2 rotations, that's 30. So we'll do the 3 rotations 3 times. Migrate the 3. So that's what we're doing today. And then multiply that by 3 because we play 3 tunes. And here we go. Now while we're going, I have to fill in the void of something to talk about. This week has been quite exciting, actually. Unrelated to Neverwinter, actually. The stuff that is happening. It's not Neverwinter commentary per se, but me in general has been a little bit exciting. We had a lot of different digressions. Met a lot of interesting folks. And talked about various topics with different contexts. Topics that I talk about quite often, but in a different context. What can we talk about, though? I'll probably think about something at some point. Right now, we'll just chill a little, right? Oh, I do have a topic to talk about. That happened this morning. Before I started streaming today. Some interesting science stuff that relates to all of this. Theory about future and what lies beyond. Well, that's not the brand that I'm presenting here, so unfortunately that won't be a topic. In fact, I actually do the opposite. it's largely about using the present to prepare for the future, not to predict the future. I think predicting the future is something that is folly. It creates being out of touch with the present, obviously, like by logic. So no theories about the future and what's beyond. It's a very common topic for people who pre-select themselves into these kind of games, though. Always talk about the future. In my opinion, based on perhaps a very limited and self-selected point of views, which I don't typically do myself by habit, so I can't really offer any theories about the future that I would be comfortable sharing. Because I don't have any at the moment. Let's see. Where are we going? Right, it's over here. The 30 Deceit. So the thing that was interesting recently, so this stuff has already happened, and trying to understand its implications for what I already know, like trying to make sense of how it fits into all the converging but perhaps coincidental observations I made in my life, is very interesting. So let's talk about this. Let's unpack this a little bit. Now, one thing to note about the information I'm about to share and how it implicates is that I am not an expert in any of these types of data collection and or interpretation of the data. So most of this data comes from my trust in a very specific group of people who their main goals of their channel and content is to make topics like these more understandable. Not in the sense of simplifying and curating the information. Their goal that is communicated implicitly and explicitly is that their attempt is to make it understandable. So these topics are well presented as complex problems and solutions and observations without any guarantee of the hustle culture of the internet, right? So they're not there to give you a simple answer, but a complicated answer that's easier to understand. And this is a shout out to a influencer, well, a creator. I'm gonna call him a creator because the amount that I know, the parasocial relationship I have with this person is goes beyond just what is made in the content creation space, right? So shout outs to Hank Green and his brother John Green. And Hank Green's main thing, like one of the how I came across Hank Green originally was this show or this webisode YouTube channel called SciShow, right? So a lot of the majority of this perspective that I'm talking about was first witnessed on SciShow. I think it was a video that was posted just yesterday. And it's going over the overview of how memory dynamics work. And we're both talking about both physically, right, in the biological world, and how that translates psychologically. And for me, I am often downstream. I talk about psychology a lot, and it's rare that you get the moment to try to connect that to something physical, like biologically. So these are one of those rare moments, and that's why it sticks out. And I can make this related to gaming in general, especially Neverwinter. Actually, we can combine the context of this to Neverwinter, or the idea of gaming and consuming content, which is a personal motivation of mine, right? To offer different perspectives and mindsets in order to allow people to pick and choose and mix and match lifestyle choices that enables them to live consistently happy, at least try to. So the nature of this SciShow episode was talking about how memory is stored, recalled, like the dynamics of memory. And sure enough, obviously, I'm not a neurologist, nor a trained professional psychologist or any of that sort. So naturally, what stuck out to the contents of this video was how coincidental a lot of my observations are. And it kind of made me really happy and sad at the same time, right? It's a bittersweet moment because a lot of the observations I have were like, oh yeah, so all of this discovery, which I'm going to go into, lines up with my, coincidentally, with my perceptions and methods that I use and encourage and advise other people to try to use and tackle, right? To try to, and it would serve as one could say whatever this content is could serve as a way to strengthen what I have been saying for a while, coincidentally, like methods to problem solving, critical thinking, how to create sustainability in habit formation, and experiencing things. And this all comes from how memory is stored, accessed, and recalled. So what is the general, like, the Sparks notes, right? Now I am actually simplifying. I'm paraphrasing and simplifying what they said because I'm not well versed enough to know all the nitty-gritty details yet. So the idea of this video was that I think the big paradigm, maybe paradigm shifting message, is the idea that human memory is dynamic in the way that it doesn't necessarily grow in volume. It grows in its efficiency. So what I mean by that is there's this idea that in order to make new memories, you have to restructure the old or actually forget old memory and consolidate them, right? And there was an observation, I talk about this in many different ways, about how when someone says, like, it's never the same as the first time, like, here's what the video game will tie in the video game in order to explain how this is coincidental with some of the stuff that I talk about quite often. This is a slight bit loud. Okay. So, you know, when we play video games, like, say, Neverwinter, right? You think about spoilers. You think about learning things novelly in isolation versus learning things with the aid and guide of someone else, right? What is a very common trend in or Neverwinter or MMO in general is the idea of removing the learning process by referencing other people's work and then learning from that, right? Using that as the foundation. However, generally speaking, when we think about the raw learning process, it's not that learning hasn't happened with one way or the other, it's the absence of specific parts of the learning process. So, for example, using a guide is a very common practice when it comes to MMOs, right? Because the intolerance level is fairly low for incompetence or inexperience, not in the sense of someone's pride or personality. It's just when you're inexperienced, you are less competent. So when we're comparing two ways of, say, clearing something, starting with a guide and then executing that guide and learning based on that execution versus going through a period of refinement and iteration for the learning process to come to the solution. Now, it's not that these two learning processes are comparable, is what is absent in each of them. When one uses a foundation approach where you take a foundation and then you iterate on it, that uses a specific it emphasizes a specific part of the learning process that is different from going in cold and developing those strategies yourself, right? There are some overlaps in the latter stages, like when you're optimizing, the optimized staging, where, okay, now you know the solution, the learning process is absent now in that regards, as in like the creative process is no longer part of, it's not the dominant part of the problem solving anymore. Like critical thinking and problem solving takes a back seat, and now you're in the optimization phase. And these two learning processes overlap, right? In this case, whichever path you took, the optimization process gets the nod. It's comparable and it's very similar. So how does this relate to how memory works, or the idea that this memory works? So it's been suggested in the video that our brain has formed physical connections between neurons, our brain cells. And we have this very collective region in our brain that is responsible for housing, like physically housing these neurons. And these neurons continue to form new connections via dendritic and axonal connections, right? You always see those like spider webby things, extensions from the neurons. Well, this web is legitimately how one visualizes the storage of our memories. And these connections and stuff are literally the way that associates and stores our memory. So now, if you think about it, as someone ages and they keep forming new memories, they are forming more and more connections with their existing and renewed neurons, right? Those neurons aren't technically consistently the same. There's also renewal, like neurons do turn over as the pool of stem cells generate new neurons. So while that is happening, which is not the focus of this, you have networks, like the connections, right? So one could imagine at some point there's going to be a limit to the spatial arrangements that are possible in the brain, in your brain. Like, where, you know, a 100-year-old person doesn't have like 3 times the volume in their brain, right? Like they didn't just naturally just expand into a universe brain. It involves pruning and dynamically changing those connections to make space. So at some point, this was interpreted by this video as a way to demonstrate that our memories shift and change with every new experience. Experiences are encoded into our memory, and they either get reinforced so that they stay, or they get consolidated into new memories. So you can imagine like, oh yeah, dude, like there are 3 houses and they're connected in a certain way, right? In order to place a new house in, well, all the current space is taken up, right? So you either consolidate the space to make room for the 4th house, or you remove one of the houses and rearrange the houses so that there are room for those 3 houses. What it suggests is that older connections either get pruned due to not used, right? So that's like using a skill or using a memory that you don't recall very often, and they become less tight or reinforced, making room for new connections and potentially settling of new neurons. So how does this translate to my discussion and techniques when I talk about the perspective on emotional intelligence and intellectual intelligence, especially when it comes to gaming? So we have to relate this back to Neverwinter, right? Or I want to relate this back to Neverwinter and live service games in general. So when it comes to the psychological outputs, because I'm not a neurologist, so I didn't know this was a thing, it fits quite conveniently, coincidentally. So this is what was shown in the video isn't necessarily a one-to-one demonstration of saying my interpretations are correct, but it makes it seem like it might be correct. So the idea when, in Neverwinter, when you're playing video games or you're establishing a parasocial relationship with a streamer or a content creator, and you're like experiencing the story and whatnot with them, right? Or maybe without them, and sharing your perspectives. Well, those are different experiences, and those memories will be different regardless, because your memories is a combination of all your experiences put together. So when someone suggests that, like, hey, the perspective is, oh man, it's a shame, but I can't hang around here because I already know how the story happened already, and it's not as interesting to me anymore because the experience will never be the same. Well, oftentimes when I hear this, generally speaking, psychologically, as someone who concerns themselves with what the motivations of a person has, generally speaking, that is an indicator that is more like they're not interested in me, as in the person. It's, in my opinion, potentially misinterpreted as a disinterest in the story or like whatever is being spoiled. What I mean by this is, it's when someone tells you that they don't want to hang around because they already know what's going to happen and it becomes less interesting, really is more likely that that person is disinterested in you, as opposed to deflecting the problem to a memory of a story. Because when you think about it, how our memories work, when you do something again, like if you read a story again, if you experience the same spoiled thing, if you have memory of that, that memory is never the same again. So when you have the perspective of saying, oh yeah, you can't possibly enjoy the same story again, it speaks to me that due to the combination of whenever it happened since the last time you experienced a thing, you likely have held on to it as though it was static. But even then, your memories of what actually happened was probably different. So oftentimes I say this as an encouragement to other people to have a renewed interest in the things they love. Because when you repetitiously do something, right, over time, the nocebo effect is incredibly powerful in psychology, right? Where, If you think something is boring because you already remembered it accurately, like if you truly believe you can remember things accurately and that is the end all be all of why you are disinterested in doing something again, both creatively, physically, repetitiously, it is coincidentally, from my perspective and this video, that it is almost statistically and inherently improbable that you are having the same experience according to your memories. That's making it less and less likely when people think that witnessing a story more than once means that they remember it identically and also experience it the same way. It's a convincing argument irrationally, for example. Like if someone is irrational enough to believe that the outcome will be the same, then the nocebo effect is, or the placebo effect, however you frame it, can be true. But the reality is that you are likely having a different experience and you are recalling it differently. It's this can be used to people's advantages. It's not necessary, in my opinion, for people to live happy lives and sustainable lives without thinking this way. It's an option for those people who have interests that are very little. Like imagine if you go to someone and says, I'm gonna do a K-Kona. No, I was gonna try to do it like a K-Kona funny impression, but like football is everything to my life, or something like that. You know, like football is everything. I live football. You know, I played football, then I tried football, and then I coach football. So how does one psychologically encourage someone who might be falling out of the repetition of football? Like if your interest is incredibly narrow, right? How do you make a compelling argument both irrationally, as in appealing to the person's emotions, right, and rationally? Well, if we understand what that's implicating, right, the whole, like, the way memory works, is that you might be able to get someone to accurately understand how their brain works. So, for example, is it the same if you do it the 1000th time versus the 999th time, right? So a lot of times I genuinely always encourage someone to do something slightly different the next time to reinvigorate their interest in whatever they did, right? So this is a very common thing in gaming in general, especially live service games. So this is why Neverwinter makes me think about these things and suggest these things. A lot of times, learning is hampered by someone's perspective. So, for example, in Neverwinter, this happens very often. When someone says you are truly experienced when you complete something for the first time. Well, when you complete something for the first time, that's certainly an experience. When you complete it a second time, it is also a specific experience. Now, how much this person improves or learns or stagnates is dependent on how they view memory and experiences. In Neverwinter, I would argue the predominant point of view is something from conventional knowledge, as in like a time before this thing I'm talking about. This idea that memory is malleable and it's dynamic. It's not static and retending. So like, you know, one of the most popular conventional analogies to how the brain works is the computer, right? Well, this specific video is literally saying it's not. So yes, memories are stored, and habitually humans attempt to recall things as accurately as they can. That is conventional knowledge. That is conventional perspective. When you recall something, it's not the same ever again. Unless you choose to live in isolation, minimize any form of new experiences in your life, which does happen when you're playing a live service game. It does happen to a great extent when you have minimum interest, as in you have very focused interest and you're a very specialized person. Like if you're a principal person, that's minimum expansion. Someone who is narrow-minded, for better or for worse, narrow-mindedness can be viewed as dedication. It can also mean unenlightened. So when you are very focused on something, like for example, playing Neverwinter for 10 years straight, your limits on the way you learn and be enthusiastic about something you spent a really long time refining could actually be not refining or iterations. It can simply be a preservation technique. They did a little side cut to dementia. So there's a natural inclination for humans to want to have the perspective of holding on to their memory as vividly accurate as the first time. That is psychologically now, at least due to this video, I'm not saying it's fact or anything, but it's a consideration that when you think of memory that way, you might actually be inherently working against what memory actually does. And it's a coincidence that how I view memory and how I have come to the conclusion that a sustainable life, all of like the sustainable practices of being mentally healthy and intellectually engaged in anything, those techniques actually play coincidentally to this idea that the way memory is stored in a biological organism like us humans, it plays to the advantage of the person, not to the disadvantage. So for example, I have often when I was growing up, one of my greatest fears when I was younger was operating on this conventional knowledge that you have to remember things, you have to practice them, remember them so you don't forget them, right? You can naturally remember things as is, as all, the holistics, the emotional intelligence and the intellectual intelligence can be preserved through rigorous training of your brain, right? And that fear just steeped and continued to grow. And over time, I reached a breaking point when I was somewhere, in my mid-20s. And naturally, I started designing or developing routines that de-emphasizes the idea that your goal is to remember things as they were. It's to practice hygiene and methods that makes the memory valuable as they are. So that includes things like, how do you feel about the story now? Not how you used to feel about the story. Because that perspective, to me, is unrealistically it's incredibly dissonant with what is actually happening to a human being that I truly believed at the time. Now this type of data and research kind of reinforces that feeling. So no longer is the conventional knowledge, at least to me, it hasn't been for like the last 10 years of my life, that memory is a static component in which you preserve. Memory is a dynamic component in which you exploit. So what I mean by that is your memories say like you had a really negative event or something. Like for me, I typically use my backdrop of being multicultural and being the victim of bullying because of racism and discrimination, and then not having specific things and all that. Well, my memory now of these events are one of fondness, a one of acceptance, tolerance, and I use these stories to create new significance in other people's lives, right? Like I try to touch people's souls using these, but that means my memories of those things have changed permanently. Like emotionally wise, everything. When I attempt to recall my bully's face from the first like 6 years since we moved to the new school district, that is no longer a memory of anger and resentment, which I say logically is probably what I felt back then, but there's no possible way of discerning if that is the case anymore. My memory is no longer that memory. So the idea about that is when someone is suffering, like in Neverwinter, for example, and I don't mean suffering in a really dramatic way. I mean just, I don't know, being annoyed or having conflicts or going up against people who seem to forget or turn over and whatnot. Naturally speaking, those people are the ones that are far more upset. Because if you think of it from my perspective, you are fighting against biology. You are fighting against the notion that there's a chance your memory works against that feeling. It doesn't stop you from trying though. Like I'm a person who definitely believes in unattainable goals being the lifetime motivators. We're talking about in a situation where someone is legitimately declining and spiraling out of control to attempt to do something that very likely your brain is not doing that. So it's an uphill battle. And if someone is very strained already, alleviating that uphill battle might actually empower them and liberate more stamina, endurance, and mental wellness, right? So overall, a lot of the things I've said over the years, especially while I was streaming about video games, plays actually advantageously to me. The idea that if one can start embracing that you're not a preservationist, as in you like to specialize in something, but that has to be bolstered by plan Bs, plan Cs, other things that keep you intellectually invested in the thing you specialize. Like for example, if you love playing Neverwinter, it requires other experiences in order for you to bring them into Neverwinter to keep it fresh, to keep it going, right? Because you're constantly needing to renew your connections with Neverwinter. And the more connections you form that complements Neverwinter, the stronger the connections of all of the things happen, the consolidation phase. So a lot of times I describe about how do I weave all these topics together. Like it always seems like I'm a bit scatterbrained and I'm going in and out of topics, but in the end of the day, I somehow come back to the exact topic that I started with. This is through many years of practice of how, in my opinion, I thought memory was working, which is the idea that you have to form connections to consolidate different memories in order to become more and more efficient. So biologically, that is visually possible, not in necessarily humans. The research was done in rats, right? An animal model. The idea is, how do you maximize your memory potential? And these strategies have existed for a while. It's just I was spinning new perspectives on how to engage these activities, which is the idea of what I'm doing right now. I'm playing Neverwinter while integrating my memory about the video I saw on Sideshow while practicing teaching and explaining this topic to myself and other people while rehearsing. What that does is that I'm doing 4 or 5 different things that are connected to each other, which strengthens the memory of the one thing. Now, what it does give away is that my memory of Neverwinter or this specific event, all the individual pieces will no longer be exactly the same. Like I will probably give up some of my memory of storing exactly what I did here, like in this very moment, like hitting these buttons, going to high turn, then high turn. However, now I remember 3 or 4 other things in that process. And that's generally the quality of life change that I encourage people to do in place of working against arguably your biology, or how I thought psychology works. And now there's a foreseeable biological explanation to why these methods end up working for a lot of people, right? So, where does this lead? Well, when you're not working against this theory of trying to memorize everything identically over and over again, we have technology to do that. So yes, it's another big coincidence that I record, I write, I journal, I data keep things I do, because that doesn't fight against my biology. It complements my biology. I have all long since accepted that naturally human memory is malleable. Like, it's dynamic, it's ever dynamic. Every day you live is going to change the nature of the memories you already have. But we have technology that can record those things for what they are at the time. And you can use that as a way to offset the devastation that comes from forgetting things. And this is something that is my worst fear, right? My worst fear is forgetting things that I've done, and one way to offset that is knowing that you have recorded something for posterity. And that goes into my emphasis oftentimes of legacy building, which is a common theme for Neverwinter players. However, because legacy is so powerful, but they, in my opinion, a vast majority of people who play legacy games like D&D related things do not participate in record keeping and legacy building and whatnot. They also are refractory to learning new experiences and improving and dynamically adjusting to their problems and quality of life things that they have in the future, right? Or have that capacity to adapt to the future. So what happens is when you have someone who's very upset, typically have a very preservational opinion, as in, oh yeah, this isn't D&D anymore, like, or this change, now I have to learn something new. That refractory period is coming, in my opinion, from someone who practices trying to hold on to memories verbatim. So overall, if that is cutting into this person's life, like just really, really cutting into their lives, it might be reassuring to provide alternatives to this person's and suggest things like, hey, have you ever wrote down what you felt at the moment? Or have you ever wrote down what you did from day to day? Or maybe even record yourself? Because what you're doing right now is trying to fight against what will inevitably happen, very likely to happen, which is that memories will be a continued struggle if your focus is to preserve what was and not what it is. So in this way, where does Cryptic and the Neverwinter community comes into this? Well, D&D has often been a spawn of preservationists. Like, it's about the traditionalism and promoting, securing that same feeling, right? Like, oh yeah, this isn't my D&D anymore, or this isn't my mod 13 anymore and whatnot. Well, if they can juggle that emotionally, that's fair enough. Like, if you're saying like, oh yeah, I'm upset, but I'm not gonna go out of my way and harm others and talk, trying to better understand or empathize with other people. Well, the first thing is that preservationist type of opinion or mindset. In reality, the person who is preserving is the person who is learning the least, and they are the one that is the rate limiting step to the development of most things. If you're trying to preserve something, you are naturally inherently preventing refinements, iteration, development, improvements, because you're trying to preserve the status quo. How does that factor into my concerns with the person themselves? Well, if they're miserable and they have a love and hate relationship with dynamic people, which most of the time developers have to be dynamic. That's part of the creative process, right? So if you're trying to empathize and communicate to a creative body and you're of one of preservation, you will not reach the level of enlightenment that's necessary to harmoniously coexist with creative individuals. Creative individuals are dynamic people, right? And it's not that the dynamic people don't understand the preservationists, it's the other way around. It's actually very unfair how biology has made it this way, so it's not supposed to be fair. When you are trying to stay the same in both memory and feeling, it is working inherently harder than trying to adjust and adapt constantly, right? So what does that mean, though, when it comes to the livelihood of someone who's preservation? Well, if they developed enough skills in their lives to cope with this, then it's fine. Like, they'll go about their lives, they'll have some W's and L's here and there, right? So that's perfectly wonderful. How does this relate to video games? Well, video games can be static. Like, they can literally be static, as in, unlike a human being who is inherently and unconditionally dynamic biologically, like, even a preservationist would agree, when they get older, they're changing. Regardless of their like principles and stuff don't change, and you don't believe people don't change at all and all that stuff, you can at least agree that biology changes, right, over time. So it's inherently dynamic. But video games are not. They are only dynamic when the creators change things. So when you're of the mindset that video games should stay the same, while at the same time desiring it to get better, that's a paradox. And one of the biggest existing paradoxes is in Neverwinter as a live service game. So lots of the conversations I've had is not necessarily abstract in this way. Like, I usually apply what I just said here as a way to meet a compromise with many people. Like, yeah, I understand that you want it to be the good old Neverwinter you desired. The irony here is that the good old Neverwinter you desire is no longer the same good old Neverwinter you desire, ever, for anyone. So when someone says, oh yeah, I remember when this used to be this and this used to be this, when that did, if say the creators, the Cryptic, the developers, reverted to that state, immediately it will become apparent to that person it's not the same anymore. Just as Blizzard reintroduced World of Warcraft Classic, the response was different, because as those people age and gain new experiences, their memories and their perceptions have changed. So when you go around fighting yourself and saying that, oh yeah, this is what I want because it's always what I wanted, holding on to something, it's not the same anymore. So instead of focusing on a past that you can't possibly grasp onto without the aid of technology, or like something else, like a storage device, using that as a basis of telling what people should want and like is probably an uphill battle. In addition, if you spend most of your life trying to preserve something that it used to be, you are also not actively learning anymore. So inherently, the people that are least equipped to deal with change, least consistent in happiness, are those people who believe that they can't change and they are always the best because things don't change. You can never be the best if you view your memory as dynamic and that everyone else is dynamic. You're always struggling to be the best you. You're always working on the best you, because the best you is constantly moving. So is everyone else. So is society. Everything is constantly dynamically in flux. What's a vivid way to illustrate that? I was watching a YouTube short recently, and it was about the swastika and the Japanese symbol for temples. It uses similar elements, only turned at an angle. An older person that was interviewed said that, yeah, you know, kids should remember this. Our schools should really do something to remind them about the stuff, right? To keep history intact. It's like, yes, sure, history is written and whatnot, but think about it. There's another poetic message in this. All the younger people didn't know what the context that separated the swastika from the temple symbol in Japan, right? I forgot what the word is. There's a Japanese, it's a character, and I don't remember what the character name was. I think it started with an M. So here's the two things, right? The old has a preservationist perspective. The young, what are they giving up for not remembering that? Well, they clearly don't know the hardships and the fears and dangers of being part of a world war, right? For better or for worse, there are trade-offs for not knowing and for knowing historically what happened during World War. So it can both serve as a learning lesson or an enabler for something. So there's always a compromise. But what I'm trying to emphasize from this, connecting this YouTube short, is that memory is dynamic, even between human beings and generation. Like, it's like we don't have the capacity as an organism, a biological organism, to preserve things verbatim. So, however, we can use tools to do that. So technologies and stuff. And oftentimes when I meet a preservationist, right? When I think about someone who's always concerned about the good old days or always re-experiencing their thing, their favorite moments and whatnot, books, photographs, recording devices, any form of recording devices, those will be your closest assets that can truly capture something. So oftentimes my emphasis to help these individuals is to encourage them to record as expressively as they can, because you cannot recall that in the future, but you can reflect upon it, so you can see it when it's recorded. If you don't record any of it, then you have to embrace the idea that your memory is fluid, right? The you today, when you look back on an event before, is going to be different. You might think it's the same. In reality, it's almost statistically unlikely that it's the same. You cannot do that. It's not part of biology. So, to get the best of both worlds, become an active record keeper. Become more expressive. So this is my segue typically to my rehearsal about understanding how to communicate with other people. If you can understand how to communicate with other people, you can also communicate with yourself. If you can communicate with yourself, you might be able to be more easily approach communicating with others. So when you're writing things and recording things, they're only as expressive and helpful as the effort you place in recording those moments. Obviously, there's a work-life balance and all that involved, but you're trying to exercise a habit that captures those moments, the moments that are important to you, the details that are important to you. And video games can serve as a substitute for that. So now we bring it back to Neverwinter or a live service game. What are those things that you want to dearly hold on to? Your gear, your item level, your legacy, your fashion. Those have substituted for a more dynamic approach. So it removed the need to practice any of those things. So now you have a day and age where gaming is part of a lifestyle. So those games represent your livelihood. They represent your legacy. Your legacy can be not bound to a video game. It can be everything you have created. You can take your legacy anywhere, anytime. Finding a way to do that is a natural way to bridge that necessity, that urgency to feel like, what have I done with most of my life? Like, how can I remember? Like, I want to remember the times, how hard I tried to clear this trial. And that's represented in the gear or something, you know, like, hey, these rewards, right? These rewards, they're a symbol of my completion of this task. You can do that anywhere. If you're able to form a habit of record keeping or recording or sharing of experiences, it immortalizes those things. So it becomes less dependent on being an impediment to creativity. So when you record and understand things in static nature, like after literally recording things and you're practicing that, it becomes easier and easier for you, relatively speaking, and it becomes less and less dependent on a game, on another person, on another system to tell you what you have done with your life. And that enables you to be open to any changes and creativity and learning. So as a mantra personally for myself, I am a skilled learner because I spent most of my time understanding that I can keep on learning things, and also learning new things will eventually probably cause me to forget things. But those things are permanently in my history because I will know I have done them at one point. I have built those skills at one point. They may not be with me today, but it's evidence, it's concrete evidence that it has been there before. Like when I pick up a violin, it's going to be different now because I've done many things before I picked up a violin again. And understanding that it's okay to accept, in my opinion, coincidentally again, that your memory is finite. It can become as efficient as possible. You can spend your whole life making your memory more efficient and never reach the top, but it is clearly finite in the way that it has to consolidate room and make way for new memories. So when you're thinking about it this way, it kind of matches all the practices that people find to have sustainable lifestyles of learning and having a healthy relationship with always experiencing things anew, right? Always being that youthful person that is constantly excited about the next thing while not trying to cling on to something that you are going to constantly battle. And that's kind of what video games are taking a place of right now. They're taking a place of legacy building. So a lot of times developers are offsetting this need, and it can be very well sustainable because one, there are a lot of video games. However, the longer you stay with a video game, the bigger the sting, right, from losing it. And that's what Neverwinter, in my opinion, the greatest conflict of interest between the vast majority of Neverwinter players and their developers is that Cryptic has to be creative as part of the creative process. That involves having to change things. For better or for worse, change is change. It's a dynamic thing to constantly reinvigorate new interest. Meanwhile, the vast majority, in my opinion, have played this game, the ones that stuck around, have played this game and developed such a codependent reliance on holding on to their legacy because this is the only evidence of their legacy. And what I mean by that is there's insufficient amount of other ways to demonstrate that this person has played Neverwinter for a really long time and had all these skills and memories. It's gone now. It's gone forever. Like, what I mean is, if they did not record those instances, and if this game changes, it's gone forever. This is the most reliable source. So holding on to like the gear and that feeling that you worked really hard, holding on to that is an act of futility. If you didn't record any of these things and this game shuts down, all those memories are gone. You cannot hold on to them. You can try your darndest to hold on to them. You can be the statistically, if you're really lucky, the 0.00001% that has a photo eidetic memory that holds on to that thing. There's a deep cut in that too. And I won't really, you know what? We have time to talk about that too. Well, you might be thinking then, let's just digress. It sounds like a really big morbid topic, but I actually think embracing that your memory is dynamic makes you consistently happier, because it means that when you wake up in the morning, you have something to look forward to. It might be the sunrise that you've seen for the 3,000th time in your life. That is new now, because the perspective is that you're forming new memories, and your old memories are benefiting and being shaped by your new experiences. Not that this sunset is not like the first sunset you ever saw. Now the first sunset is even better because you saw the 3,000th sunset. So every time you go and do something, right? Say this is, for me, the 8th week of Spelljammer. And today I'm doing the same thing I did last week. Well, it's not the same thing I did last week. What is different about it? This exact conversation. I didn't do this conversation last week. Right? This memory is forever going to be different. You can't possibly expect to have the same experiences even while doing the exact same thing. It can be near the same, for sure, like going to work each day. It can be near the same, but it really isn't the same. You are surrounded by, and when you go to work, you are also surrounded by other humans who can't be the same person anymore. Like, literally cannot be the same anymore. The memory has changed. You've lived one extra day. We are linear time creatures, right? So what does, like, for that, it's supposed to be empowering, in my opinion. It's empowering. Remember to, like, if you really feel like you want to hold on to legacy, find ways to preserve that legacy. Collect things. Write in your journal. Start a food diary. Take pictures. And then those things will serve as ways to alleviate and allow you to continue learning new things and appreciating new things in the present. So you have records of the past while being able to focus on the present to develop techniques to adapt to the future. So that's kind of my, like, whole trifecta of maintaining a steady happiness, right? Those are the steady happiness. What am I doing here? Oh, I'm just kidding. Picking out Koatoas. Let's digress just to make sure that it's not one-sided. Now, what about thinking you're special? Let's say, nah, I have a really good memory. Like, I can remember things exactly the way they are. Like, that's what I do. Well, let's say if that's true, right? Let's say if it's true. Usually the thing I focus on is, what are the trade-offs when you have great memory? Like, a lot of times people would argue like, oh yeah, well, humans are getting smarter as they're evolving and whatnot. And one day, you know, we'll all have like superhuman brains and we won't forget things and all that. That is the ultimate goal. So you know, there's definitely no trade-offs for that, right? Well, I often try to ground something in reality. A lot of times, it's not to say it's better or worse, but here's my 2 cents. I like to think when I was younger, at least that's what people gave me feedback, that my memory is very good. As in, it's an above average memory. Like, my recall is pretty decent. I'm actually downplaying this because what are the trade-offs for not being able to forget things and form new memories? Well, when you're a preservationist, right? And say you do have the memory to preserve everything. You always experience something based on the first time. Like, you just don't forget things. Well, what does that look like? You never get to literally have new experiences at some point. Eventually you won't ever develop new emotions. Like, you can't forget something and be reminded of how beautiful something is. You can't fall in love again with something you fell out of love with. So if you're thinking what it's like in a thought experiment, say like you have an eidetic memory. Well, there are people in this world who was born with exceptional eidetic memory, and they have different struggles. They have struggles to keep them intellectually interested, right? Like, well, if you start learning everything and you never forget anything and things run out, well, the first thing you're challenged to do is be the person who is always going to have to come up with new things. Is that possible? Generally speaking, yes and no. Emotionally, it will be exhausting for the rest of their lives. They will constantly be pressured to finding novelty everywhere they look. And that places stress on them. That leaves no room for connections, no room for experimentation, no room for re-exploring things. Like, let's think about it this way. What does it take to bridge the gap between two people, right? How do you strengthen the bond between two people? It's through refinement and repetition. If you had a relationship with two people who always have an eidetic memory, If they had a poor first impression, there will be no chance, highly improbable, that they'll ever be able to resolve those memories. Like, if you hate someone, you can never learn to love someone, like that same person, ever again. When you have a traumatic experience outside of your control, you can never consolidate and dynamically forget how painful that memory was. Your memory is no longer dynamic, it's static. So just imagine living a life where you can't forgive, you can't stop hating something, as well as you can't stop loving something. So say someone who has an eidetic memory first discovers morphine. Well, they can't forget how good morphine is. Their memory is impeccable. There's so many ways that being less dynamic, thinking you're a human being that has static memory, is like pretending like you're a computer. What happens when a computer has a virus that it can't fight? Well, it's doomed. When a human encounters a virus, they will continue to learn how to adapt to it, or try at least, right? So when you're thinking about a preservationist type of mindset, you are also thinking about someone who don't learn anymore, who minimizes learning, who is less skilled, less adaptive. So when you're thinking about a video game and you're thinking about the rating system, a developer is encouraged to make the rating system, like things that measure aptitude and challenges, a reflection of human dynamics, how their brain, like how they're dynamically learning and improving. When you stay static, it only takes your weakness to take you down. That's it. That's all you know. That's all you'll ever know. And to me, the truth here is that I think Neverwinter, all my years with Neverwinter, I've encountered some of the most loyal people, the most committed people to upholding rules and like standards and stuff. They're super consistent, but they are also incredibly narrow-minded, prideful, arrogant, and fail to learn new perspectives ever. So actually, it's a trade-off. It's a compromise. The more you're committed and loyal to upholding a status quo, the less likely you will learn new things, take on new perspectives, and dynamically adapt to new environments, because you have to stay loyal. If you adapt to a new environment, you are no longer loyal. And that's the duality, in my opinion, of the struggle, the struggle of Neverwinter, which is a D&D property that has a philosophy of maintaining traditionalism while being a live service game. Live service game can't stay the same. The vast majority of people live dynamic lives. So the game has to change dynamically over time. Even the most foolhardy and consistent people their lives will change over time, and their preferences will change over time. It's to the point where those people who think their preferences haven't changed have no evidence to suggest they haven't changed. I do. And even though I don't think I have a great memory. I don't agree with most people. I have a great way to recall like related technique. Like I use techniques to recall related details, but they're not like stark memory power or anything like that. I'm not remembering things as they were. I'm remembering things as they are. So it might give the deception that maybe I remember a lot of things, but generally speaking, if you ask me another thing, it will change a little over time, and I embrace that. The idea is the volume of the stuff I remember is greater because I associate all the things. I practice a technique that increases efficiency. You know, when you start talking about preserving things, you're just not great at adapting to new things. And how is that relevant to everything I've used? My brand, I guess. I'm slowly identifying myself as what I want to spend a lot of time focusing on. And that's the idea of encouraging people to understand what it takes, what mindset it takes that may possibly lead to consistent happiness and success in a general sense. And that's understanding that your memory and your skill is dynamic. When you need to make room to be successful, if you're not already successful, you need to learn new skills. Thinking that your current things, like the things that you do, if you do it long enough, will flip the switch, is less likely than learning newer things and complementing the thing you're learning now. Because if you do the same things, you get diminished return as a human being in general. It comes with lots of other trade-offs too. Like, if you do something for a very long time, it becomes dull, and you no longer engage in it in the same way that you have done before. You can try to convince yourself that it has, as if you record yourself, you can answer that question. You know, like, I think I'm a reasonably intelligent person when it comes to memory, okay? Even when I did the same experiment 7 times in a row, I know that if I didn't record those things, I would have not understood if I actually improved or not, right? And video games remove that necessity. So if you spend most of your time playing video games, or you're part of a generation that relies completely on a systematic way of metrics that is provided for you, you do not have the skills. You have not practiced the skills to create those metrics yourself. So it's inherently, in my opinion, imperative to encourage people to be able to form legacy and value themselves, and be able to create new sources of significance that's not dependent on things they can't control, like a video game. The developers are inherently going to enter a state of creative freedom. If your legacy, emotional state, and self-worth in the game is dependent on the system, the metric system that a game is providing, then you are no longer practicing skills that allow you to capture that value without the need for someone else to provide it. I don't have that need. Like, I'm doing it myself in my own way. I have full control of record keeping of what I've learned, what I've forgotten, what I choose to forget, and what I choose to learn. Like, it's a choice. If you're going to build a new skill, you might need to make room for that new skill. Times are changing, so what did I have to unlearn? The reliance on using a phone to have a conversation, like calling someone, right? I don't practice that very often anymore because the times have changed. So now, in order for me to adapt, I must substitute texting, using emojis, understanding how a vast majority of people communicate now. And that replaces a skill I invested a lot in. Not completely, because I'm preserving some of it by integrating the emojis and understanding people and telling them the pros and cons of being able to communicate orally, you know, in person or across a medium, and texting and whatnot. So eventually you can complement, you can consolidate a lot of your skills too. And my goal is usually consolidation, not necessarily forgetting and remembering. Well, it's ironic, but those who are narrow-minded and focus on specific techniques, their perspective is they don't want to forget and lose something because if they try something new, it'll take place of it. But you can do both, is my counter argument. In fact, I would say more times than, without going into like a huge digression regarding how consolidating gives you an overall higher consistency in skill building, I would say you are more likely to be overall more skillful and dynamic if you're able to consolidate and do more tasks altogether. So you get the kind of the catharsis or the reward of knowing you can still do something to some extent and also always be ready to take in new information. There's an upper limit to that too, obviously. It's the hot take here is, if you're a consolidating person, your glass ceiling is far higher. This is a hot take. Far higher than someone who specializes in something. If your life is happy enough and consistently happy that you choose to sacrifice that, then that's fair. Like, one way is that a specialist's glass ceiling is so high it's unattainable in their lifetime. Then, generally speaking, they will stay happy for the rest of their lifetime. If the discipline and the thing they chose is unachievably capped in their lifetime, then they can most definitely stay happy for the rest of their lifetime. Because we're understanding that it's a shorter lifetime, right? If you have a discipline that has a cap, for example, playing Neverwinter has a very defined cap, and you spend all the time trying to argue that the cap needs to change in a way to keep on going up, to preserve the way you have learned, then really you're probably the least competent person in the group. If you were to compare someone who's willing to always dynamically adapt to new environments and changes, they will generally and consistently outpace a person who is constantly trying to preserve the same thing that they're doing forever. Like, holding on to things is for legacy building. Consistently being happy in life in a reality that is constantly changing requires a dynamic person. If you're very upset now and spiraling out of control, well, I don't even need to defend this from a different perspective. If things are spiraling out of control and they're depreciating over time, a change is the only thing, or one can get lucky. It's possible to get lucky, but generally speaking, that luck leads to a change that allows one to stop spiraling, right? So if there's any take-home message here from wrapping it back, right? Wrapping back to the sideshow thing about memory, about being dynamic, is that even biology, I would say, and my understanding of psychology, I suppose, my loosey-goosey 30, barely 40 years of life psychology and whatnot and observational skills, is that everything points to the most reliable way is to have a mindset that embraces a human being as ever dynamic, not static. So all the behaviors that tend to try to preserve oneself, it's an uphill battle, and there are people who made it so. Like, there are people who were able to spend the majority of their lifetime preserving what they hold dear. it's still less consistent. If you take the whole population, it's still less consistent than the successful people who are constantly dynamically shifting. The leaders of the world are constantly changing. The people who are consistently happy are the ones who are constantly adapting. They are rarely ever the person who is not changing over time. So in what universe, in my opinion, in what universe is it logical and irrational to, or intuitive for that matter, to say that the formula, the goal to happiness is to preserve what made you happy originally, which you can't do, by the way. So that's kind of the deep cut here. You literally can't do that. You can try your darndest by recording yourself, writing journals and stuff, and even then, when you reflect upon those memories, those recorded memories, it's from a different lens. You can never be the 20-year-old who wrote that journal entry. You can do your best to educate your future self of how you felt then. When you read that statement, it is going to be one of a stranger looking back on himself. Like, you looking back on a stranger, on a person. And just to tie it all up, one last thing. Shout outs to Hank Green again. He's a person that I really have a strong parasocial relationship with. He recently fought cancer. I want to say it was lymphoma. And he survived. And he's in remission, thankfully, in my opinion. It would have been a little bit devastating to me because of the whole parasocial relationship thing. And he made a video, and it's the end of the year video. You know, people reflect upon their legacy and what have them. And he legitimately talked about this. Like, some things that make you start thinking are like crises in your life. Like, you start thinking, memory is dynamic. So you can never be the same person you ever were. So there are going to be things you forget, right? There are things. He actually, his video was really, really awesome. It was about elf pasta. He decided that he recorded himself eating elf pasta from the movie Elf. It was like some pasta with like lots of sugar and like M&Ms and, or maybe Skittles and then chocolate syrup on pasta or something. And it was a segue to him saying, well, you know, there are a lot of things that we do in our life. And then when we forget them, does it mean did we ever do them in the first place? Right? It's kind of like the whole, if the tree falls down in the forest and no one's there to hear it, did it actually fall down? Right? So it's an existential thing, right? An existential thing. Well, what we can do is to record things and see them from a new lens. When you look at yourself now and read about yourself before, it will help the present you. But you can't be that person anymore. And that's kind of poetic in better or worse cases, right? Like, it is bad if you always want to be the same person. Fair enough. However, I would argue it's not better, but it's healthier and more sustainable. That might not be better to some people. It's healthier and sustainable to be able to realize that you're always going to be better than your former self. I know what that sounds like, but a lot of people would focus and compartmentalize the preservation thing. Like, oh yeah, but I'm not as fast as I were before. You weren't also 20 year, like, for example, someone would say, oh yeah, you know, back in my prime, I could run this fast. And yeah, but back in your prime, you also didn't have 20 years of experience. Like, say a 30-year-old looking back on they're 38 now, and they're looking back on 18 and saying like, oh, you know what? I remember this very specific thing that I value more than anything else, my speed. And they look back and say, oh yeah, you know, I wish if I were 18, so everything's framed around preserving that memory of it was 18, I could have been like, I could have schooled you in this. Yeah, but you also have 20 years of so many more valuable things that you decided to sideline and devalue in your life. You've done so many things in those 20 years. Reflecting upon something you wish to preserve is likely going to devalue all the things that define you today. So, yeah, Neverwinter, when the next module hits, right? When we're done with Spelljammer, we're gonna take it back. When we're done with Spelljammer, the next module is gonna come out. The whatever the gear you had, or whatever the gear you failed to earn, right? Like, I didn't get these, even though I tried to get these, right? From Defense of the Moon Dancer. They're gonna be of something of the past. They're gonna be phased out. You can choose to be, I like to believe, you can choose to be happy or sad about it. It's definitely within most people's comprehension, in my opinion. It might not be the same starting place. Like, some might embrace it far more than others, right? And that's largely due to practice. And that's what that digression was about. Or this digression is about. What that video really highlighted to me. And confirmed to me in a way. I wouldn't say it's like hard evidence, like direct evidence, because obviously it's still an animal model. But it's really elegantly, coincidentally correlating with lots of the practices and things I observe about human health and their behaviors. So I would throw in one little thing, right? Is the idea of like sticking to something you like, right? If it ain't broke, don't fix it, kind of thing. Like, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But the thing that you think is not broke is never the same. And that creates a paradox. Like, someone says like, well, you know, I've been doing this for the last 30 years. Well, you've been doing this the last 30 years differently. It might not seem like it's different because you're not focused on seeing the differences. You're focused on preserving the similarities. This is the one, you know, I've been an engineer for 30 years and I've done the same thing for 30 years. It's a tried and, you know, tested standard that kept me successful all your life. It has changed momentarily, little by little. Little changes over time are less apparent to someone who's not looking for them. You have 30 years of experience that cumulatively change your way of doing the thing that you focused on preserving being the same. There are very few people on this planet that has their brain biologically somehow have the capacity to remember even... It would be pretty impressive, actually, to remember 30 years of identical repetition. I honestly think it would be impressive for someone to do something live 2 days identically. Can you possibly even live 2 days identically? I would love to see that, what that looks like. A video game, possibly. Like, it's the closest thing. Like, a closed system is possibly the closest thing you can get to repetitiously doing something near identically. But any more dynamics than that, and even a video game, is very difficult to know, because you won't feel the same every single day. There's a hand wavy generalization of how you feel. So today, to wrap it up, this little digression, it's the 8th week of Spelljammer, and it might seem like I'm doing the same thing, but obviously I'm not, right? And I choose not to make it the same. And most people can also choose to do so as well. Is it overall going to increase your happiness and your consistency in your life? I like to believe that, but I'm not selling life hacks here. I'm just talking about observations. It is up to the person or the stranger or myself, my future self, to determine if there's something special there. And one day I'll look back and think to myself, well, I can't possibly understand everything that I was going for in this digression, because I clearly didn't express everything that's going on in my head. But you know what? I like to believe my future self is going to think, yeah, there's definitely some merit to this stranger's perspective on the dynamics of memory and how it affects our decision making, or pretty much everything else, right? Because the learning process involves encoding new memory and then using that memory to develop skills that pretty much shape everything we do. So this goes back to that little jab about thanks, Lake House. This goes towards that jab about how someone loves a story. Like, say you love your grandfather's story. He sits down with you at night. You're about to go to bed. You're just a wee little young lad, right? And your grandfather tells you his story for the first time. It was fantastic. It was filled with adventure, and you were enamored. Fast forward 10 years, your grandfather wants to tell you the story again, but this time for the 100th time. Do you enjoy it again? Do you think it's the same? How do you feel about it? Maybe you find it boring, right? Now you find it boring. The idea is you can probably find it boring, and because it's boring, it can become interesting again. What I'm saying is, if you know your grandfather's story is going to be boring now that you've heard it 100 times, ask your grandfather for more details. Contribute to the storytelling. Your grandfather is just as dynamic as you are. So when the story involves you, the telling of that story can be dynamic as well. Now, let's just say if I ended up in my old age, my stories change every time they are told. Like, they're slightly changed every time. And what I mean by that is, we're not talking about the generalized semantics. Like, oh yeah, this is when I went to buy bread. Well, it's going to be about when I bought bread. But my feelings about it will change over time. Like, one day I'm going to be emphasizing one part of the story, and another day I'm going to be emphasizing a different side of the story. I am not trying to tell the story the same way every single time. I'm embracing I'm embracing my humanity and understanding that the people I'm listening to will also find it very interesting to expressively storytell. And that's kind of the difference, in my opinion, between someone who is creatively storytelling and incredibly expressive than someone who's trying to be mechanical and robotic about it. It's great for science, right? It's great for science when you're solving like mechanical things and whatnot and repetitious things. It's different when you're sapping the life out of your own stories about your own life. So I've had this conversation a couple of times. It happens a lot when I ask someone, hey, you know, Merry Christmas, friend. What you do today? Like, how's your holidays going? And the first comment, the most consistent comment that I got was, oh, you know, we do the same thing. Nothing really special. It's the usual thing. We talk with families. Like, oh, that sounds pretty special. Like, nah, you know, we do it all the same. So, well, it's not all the same to me. And then even if it is all the same to that person, that's what I'm talking about. The whole preservation thing. The focus is on what is the same, so it dulls the need to be expressively sharing about it. It's an extension of what I'm saying, where when you enter a routine, it also saps the life out of your routine. And it's a human condition. When you do something repetitiously, it becomes less intellectually stimulating. And then what happens is you project that disinterest. As in, oh yeah, you know, today, like, if I were to describe someone what I was doing today, it's like, oh yeah, I'm doing the 8th week of Spelljammer, right? And I said earlier and kind of projected this interest, like, ah yeah, you know, nothing has changed and stuff. So how do I change it up? While I talked about the facts, no patch notes, talked about some of the changes, like the changes that I noticed, I brought a story with me. I brought an idea with me. It's not the same. And I quite literally probably spent 2 hours digressing about this. And now it's different. If it is the same, well, I'm not going to let it stay the same. Although video games, again, is a great, it's the closest thing that can be repetitiously reproduced. But you're a human being, right? I'm a human being playing a game. What can I contribute? Or what can I make it feel significant and not a waste of time? If you're going around telling people that you're just doing the same old, and or at least not people like me, if you come up to me and tell me like, hey, how are you? And then I ask you, how are you? And you just said like, you know, I just got this out of the way, and today I had to do the same old grind and stuff. I'm worried about you, in my opinion. Like, that's not... And you bet if you were to tell me that, I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to, not so subtly, almost not really gaslight, but compliment how much you accomplish each day. It's to encourage the person to not get stale and stagnate with their life. Because again, my one digression that I really highlight on my channel is the dangers of boredom. When you get to that state, you not only feel bored, not want to learn anything, not look forward to other things, you also project boredom. So then people become less interested in you. People drift away from you. You stop practicing being expressive. And it's really a big part of your life. So when if you are bored with your life, how can you possibly get other people to be interested in your life? Well, you hope you're lucky and that someone captures the moment for you. And video games kind of do that. It offsets that. So it's great that we have these things. It's even greater and more powerful if you can do it whenever you want, right? Like, you don't have to be dependent on a video game to make your life sound fantastic. You can also get lucky and bump into someone like me who really just thinks everyone has fantastic lives to begin with. But what are the chances of that happening? Well, I can tell you, if you're looking at a Twitch streamer, that's very unlikely to happen. Especially a popular one, right? So I'm gonna say that I'm not statistically likely to happen. So you're not gonna get someone who's gonna go out of their way to convince you that your life is interesting. You have to convince them that your life is interesting. And when you if you're able to convince other people that your life is interesting, you might actually believe that your life is interesting. And what does that do for you? It makes you really love life. If it's already hard enough to tell someone who doesn't even know what's going on in your life that your life is interesting, that just tells me that this person is starting to get into a pattern that really doesn't value their own life. And I don't want to see, in my opinion, yeah, if you're 60 years old or 70 years old, okay, I'll concede. If you have closure in your life, you don't necessarily have to keep being excited about your life. You might have enough excitement for a lifetime, right? Like, you're over it, you got it, fair enough. When I'm playing video games, I don't usually talk to 60-year-olds and 70-year-olds. I usually encounter like 18-year-olds, and they're nihilistic as heck. Like, if they're not nihilistic now, they show most of the signs of being nihilistic. As in, life, life goes on, like, it's Christmas again, we just do the same thing, we buy a gift and, hang out with family. It's like, man, that sounds lovely. That's my first response most of the time, right? That sounds lovely. Tell me about it. Tell me about what you did, what you talked to your family about. And then, sometimes it can be too personal and you'll be like, don't, if you can't share it, that's fine. Tell me how it made you feel. Like, you don't have to be specific about it. The idea is to encourage kids to be either acknowledging what they're doing or finding meaning in what they're doing. I literally had someone tell me online, it's there, by the way, it's recorded, that someone told me that, hey, this entire group of people who has this hobby that ranges up to millions of people, millions of kids, are just young kids who don't need to understand they can find meaning in things that don't have meaning. Like, that guy is someone I encountered. Like, well, if you go around thinking that about other people, man, I can't imagine what it's like to live inside the person's head, where they have to go around and make other people's passions and stuff insignificant to them by passing it off as a gaslight. Yeah, sure. I respect that you don't think it has a meaning, right? It doesn't have a meaning. That's fair. All the power to you. Well, to your perspective, I'm producing a meaning where there isn't one. Can you do that? Because it doesn't look like you can. So one day, you're gonna find that your life is dull and all you do is go around and try to rain on other people's parade, and you can't even find satisfaction for your own significance. So, whether or not that person was trying to be harmful or not, I'm not concerned with that. I'm more concerned for the person's well-being, because if 1 million people are playing a video game and you're suggesting it's not significant, it doesn't have any meaning, especially problem solving, then you're really out of touch with reality. I mean, there are less people playing Neverwinter, for example. It wasn't about Neverwinter, though. I wish everyone to find significance. I mean, that also implies that I hope that people who are malicious, right? Here's a very big caveat here. But are you know, someone could challenge me and say, are you saying also like those bullies and like criminals and stuff need to find significance in what they're doing too? It's like, well, they're humans. If they manage to find significance in other things, imagine if that what led to that person's act of desperation. It's a more of a chicken or the egg question now. If this person, if that criminal or that person, that troll or what have you, were cyberbullying, if they found and enabled themselves to find significance in other things, would they have become a cyberbully in the first place? If their lives is filled with significant moments and whatnot, it's a thought experiment. Obviously, I can't make a claim one way or the other. Someone may say, you know, some people are just born evil, and I'm like, okay, I can't do anything about that, right? That is that person's firm belief. That's fair. To me, since I've already presented this idea of dynamics, right? The biology suggests that humans are dynamic, and that goes against a lot of things that people hold on dearly, like the nature of a person doesn't change, right? That type of perspective, and the traditional conventional knowledge, like, oh yeah, if rotten people are always rotten people. It's a very touchy subject, and I respect that those individuals who have experienced trauma have held on to those trauma, or those people have experienced something that selectively caused them to hold on to certain memories a lot, like really vividly, and they have my sympathy. I just live in a naive world, I guess, a very naive, idealistic world. The perspective that the person who has trauma can eventually develop faith in that rotten people can be great people, damaged people can become healed people, and that in an ideal world, both parties get to find sustainability and significance in their life. It's not one or the other. I'm not picking sides. I am just living an idealistic and naive perspective that both parties can end up being happy in some way. It's naive. Don't get me wrong. Like, I'm absolutely willing to accept that naive premise. Obviously, if I can accept that it's naive, that means that I have a realistic perspective that makes that not a possibility. I just keep it in the back of my head, though. I always want to believe in something, but not necessarily accept that it is true. I don't accept that it is feasible a lot of times. I like to believe it, though, so I can stay grounded with the realities of things while being hopeful at the same time. And that's usually where I end up sounding wishy-washy, and it's like, well, then that means you don't have conviction and you don't believe in the good nature of people, or you believe people are ever-changing and vitriolic. Is that the word I'm looking for? You know, very fickle, I guess. You know, that stuff. Like, well, all the above. All the above. Just to exchange conversation with myself, I suppose. And for those who may listen in the future, it sounds really sappy because I am openly a sappy person. Not a, you know, again, I've talked about this before. I'm not a thin-skinned person. I'm just sappy. Like, I'm horrendously sappy when it comes to these things. But yeah, you can... most people take it as a... I'm not inviting controversy either. Like, I don't want to invite controversy. I just want to know that if someone disagrees with me, I hope they're happy. Like, if insulting me gives them value and reinforces their convictions, then that's fine. It doesn't really hurt me that much. I don't think it hurts me. It actually might motivate me, inspire me to look for new ways of presenting ideas. That's what happened this week, by the way. Like, you know, it's getting... the next time we play Neverwinter is going to be after the New Year's, right? So this is effectively, right, the 26th, 6 days from now. Yeah, it's going to be after New Year's. This is effectively my reflection on this year. I don't usually do, maybe in the future if people are interested, but I don't usually do like yearly reviews or something, because I naturally do reviews every time I do projects. So like in another 2 reset days, I will be reviewing Spelljammer. Like, not reviewing the sense of like game journalism and stuff. Objective reviews, you can find reviews that are trying to be objective anywhere. Like, that's plenty. I generally don't talk about objectivity. I spend most of my life in objectivity, and I certainly could appreciate what it's like to aim to be objective. Nowadays, I think there's less and less appreciation for what could be for someone versus what is for someone. Like, this game is not for you because of X, Y, and Z. Well, those are facts. The interpretation is not objective. However, it's passed off as being objective. I have no concerns of telling you that I do not have factual or any evidential ways to support what I'm saying. The idea is that these are experiences. In fact, if I told you a fact, here's a fact, right? To relate to what I've been digressing about today. If I told you a fact, that fact might not be the same the next day. Because facts are based on people's memories. Facts are, you need to record it and read it again. However, tenuously, when you're remembering those things, you're going to use them for different things. Like, you're going to interpret them differently from day to day. Like, it's going to change relatively. Like, one day, the fact that you have is probably non-changing, but your opinion about the fact, your interpretation and your mood and how you use it or going to apply it is going to change based on your mood. Because you're just human. And it's great. It's kind of, we live in a time where there's hyper objectivity, like hyper reliant on trying to be objective when you're reviewing things. Let's just take a step back and think about how oxymoronic that comment is. You're going to spend all your efforts to trying to review a product, like a creative product. We're specifically talking about video games. There are extraneous circumstances, like buying 6 hot dogs versus buying 8 of the same hot dogs. There are objective ways, you know, to compare those things. We're talking about how much video games appeal to someone, right? Think about how oxymoronic that sounds. You are going to objectively review a game so that other people can make an objective decision on whether they're going to like or dislike a game. The hyper objectification of psychological behavior and preferences is a symptom, in my opinion, of how YouTube algorithm and, you know, like the automation process works. Yes, automation's great, it creates consistency. I'm all for that. I'm just talking about the philosophy of this. Like, you are trying to objectify how much people are going to like or dislike something. I'm not sure. I might need to say that again one more time, right? You are going to objectify something that is inherently subjective and try to present it as objective while subjectively presenting your interpretation. So it's a little weird. I know I said a bunch of words a couple times back and forth to make it sound confusing, but it is confusing, at least to me. So you're trying to you're trying to subjectively present your objective argument about people's subjectivity. That's bold. And you know why there are like 8 billion reviewers and critics and whatnot? It's because it's inherently inconsistent. And that's kind of part of the charm, in my opinion. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's actually very charming. Like, think about it. When you read a review, what is the charm of trying to read someone's subjective interpretations of objective metrics? It's an exercise in futility, but here's a spin on it. It's also an opportunity to get to know someone and form a parasocial relationship with people you desire to have a parasocial relationship with. You can learn about that person through their piece. So instead of focusing on the value of that particular review, you can discern if this person has similar perspective that you do. So in the future, that parasocial relationship that you have with this person can be a reliable indicator of something that will save you decision making. I've already used an example like that today. Hank Green and John Green. I feel that I have a sufficient understanding of them that when they suggest something and interpret something, right, I am probably consistently likely to do the same thing too. So when they raise interest in something, then I will naturally be interested in that thing too. And that's kind of what the YouTube algorithm is trying to do, right? However, it's based on you. So, and then it enables you to need to have the skills to do that in return. So what the YouTube algorithm is removing is that process, the process of looking to see if this person really is for you. Null hypothesis testing. When an algorithm suggests a video to you, do you ever ask if this video is appropriate for you? Or in what nature is this concordant with your interest, right? So a lot of times people just don't ask, they just click. And then let the person behind the frame convince you that it's important, right? So you don't need to work hard or put in extra effort to determine a null hypothesis test. When I see YouTube recommend things algorithmically to me, I ask myself, do I really find this stuff interesting? Or is it interesting because I just see a lot of it because the algorithm is telling me, is mere exposing me to it, right? That kind of thing. It's like walking out the door, right? Or visiting a cultural hub, like visiting New York City. You're going to be exposed to things that you ask that question to yourself. On the internet, though, it's usually based on statistical parameters, and those things are likely to already have convinced you. It's like, yeah, you looked up a lot of bunny videos, so here's more bunny videos. So it's distilled to the point where, well, you don't really ask yourself that question very often. Therefore, you don't practice that anymore. What is a great trade-off of this? Becoming poorer and poorer judge of character. Because if you don't practice it in parasocial relationships, what happens when you actually go out to form a relationship? Well, you haven't practiced it. So, what do we have? Here's a deep cut that I'm not going to go into, just as a primer. You have younger generation of people who think that relationships and compromises and communication should be as easy as the algorithm matching you up. There's no compromises, no learning to love one another, no I can learn something from you, you can learn something from me. It's more, why isn't this easy and just work out on its own because there's a rating system or some sort of metric that brings two people together. And a lot of times, I try to counter this by saying, hey, I fell in love with things that I didn't even know I wanted. I developed skills that I clearly didn't go out of my way to do in the first place. There's no randomness. So, how is this important? When your life requires randomness, that is why it's important. What is a great time to practice these things? And this was the theme of my week of digressions. When is it a great time, logically speaking? We're not talking about emotional stuff now. Logically speaking, what is a great time to practice for life-changing decisions? When they're trivial. So what is a great time to practice being a better judge of character? When you're watching that influencer and challenging yourself with that how much you know about that influencer through their content. Because if you get it wrong or you did something and you misunderstood them, it's a parasocial relationship. It's one-sided. They don't even know you exist. Yet. Right? So it hasn't become serious yet. That's a perfect time to practice skills that can't possibly harm you at the moment. It might harm your pride a little, and it might get you down low. It's not gonna ruin two people's relationships with each other, like literal relationships. So video games is a great place to do that. And that was the theme. No, a game might not be super hardcore frontal lobe activation for problem solving and critical thinking. And that's the whole point. You use video games to practice these things. The last thing you want to do is make a life and death situation, life and death decision after not practicing making decisions for a really long time. It's the difference between being responsible of getting into a car under the influence than not. A person who has made lots of quote-unquote self-imposed significant decisions while doing other things like playing video games or what you have for lunch will treat and likely have the skills to make incredibly important decisions when they come up. So if life is going easy for you, it's a great time to take up a challenge. Because your in a great state of mind. You're in the ideal state of mind to take up more challenges. So let's just double back to Neverwinter now. What is a very great opportunistic moment to get better at video games? Like, or develop a higher literal value of yourself with accolades. Hope that Cryptic changes the system again next module. Because if you can deal with that in a video game, then when some real stuff hits you, you know, some harder stuff hits you, you've already practiced that. If Cryptic changes something and it makes you change all the ways you have to play this game, and you run away from it and say, I'm quitting this game and playing a different game, well, that's one of your problem solving skills. How do you solve a problem when change the game you love to something you don't love? You walk away from it. You've learned something about yourself. It might not be ideal, but you at least know how to walk away now. You practice walking away from something. It's not negative or positive, per se. The facts are you walked away from it. That's a practice of walking away from things. You might be... A lot of times, I think people were gonna expect me to say, like, oh yeah, you're running away. That's a negative thing. Well, it's a negative and a positive thing. You're practicing something you don't do very often. When is having the ability to walk away very useful? When you are addicted to something and that addiction is killing you. When you're doing it for something less likely, you're practicing for times when you have to walk away, even against maybe a trivial but a lot of emotional sentiments, right? That's what I'm talking about. Preparing people. And I think when you're healthy and you're just going about your way, life is good. That is easily the most opportune moment to take up challenges. Because when you're in a bad state of mind and life has kicked you down and like cut you open and then maybe pour some salt on these wounds, at least you'll have some practice. Some practice where you can gather from your experiences to keep, soften the blow. And kids aren't really reminded of that these days. The video games are just deliberately telling you what is and what isn't. Not what could be. So you don't look for alternatives, you look for what is. So here's a deep cut into something. This is a hot take about Neverwinter. In order for people to play a game, they must have adequate gear rewards to encourage them to play. That is a stagnant, old school, preservational perspective on how to condition people to be encouraged for self-improvement. What's a more contemporary way that is flexible, that compromises between Cryptic's need for creativity and inclusiveness and maybe the sustainability of the veteran players and whatnot, and maybe possibly the preservationists? Well, having reward that has no tangible effects on performance and migrating to rewards that are sentimental, right? So that when you have sentimentalism, it's not associated with performance. What does that look like? Well, I think Cryptic has been doing half and half here. Like a title, a fashion item, a signet, or an emblem of legacy, right? but they're not bound by performance differences. When you have gear as a form of completion, those who complete things will continue to complete things. Those who don't will continue to not complete them. And that's kind of still true on all the modules. Neverwinter, in my opinion, is still struggling with balancing. Like, Cryptic is still struggling with balancing how to convert this into a live service model versus the old school stuff, right? The traditionalism. I don't think, I mean, I love for them to conceptualize something that is completely different from what I envision. That would be amazing, right? Like, it would be awesome if I am totally proven incorrect, and then I can talk about that in the future. But for now, there is not a current live service model that's existing that uses this approach of attaching improvements, attaching completion and improvement to performance gains. It's not sustainable. You'll eliminate every player from then on. So you're either here since the beginning or you're not. So it just caps the community. Occasionally you'll probably find people who don't have FOMO and all that other stuff and legacy and the need for sentimental investment to stay with a game. But generally speaking, you're creating a system that are people who are zeros and ones. They either go cold turkey or they don't. So it's like, hey, I'm never coming back to this game. Once I leave, there's no way back in. That's just it. Because your reward for performance enhances performance. We're not even getting to the point of pay to win stuff. This game is a behavior to win. It's a legacy to win. That's acceptable in a lot of games, like old games. It's acceptable. Legacy is acceptable. Pay to win is obviously not acceptable. Ironically, I feel pay to win is far fairer than legacy. That's a hot take too. So let's think about it this way. What can trump legacy in this society, right? Like, say you have 30 years of experience. Is it harder to argue against someone who plays in a system where legacy is valued over performance, or a system where you pay to them for the performance differences? Well, first of all, paying more people have access to, far more than legacy. There's a reason why legacy is so powerful. When someone's with the game for 10 years, legacy, like, there are very few people who can compete with you. They can't just magically get 10 years of experience, or 10 years, or say 10 years. Time is far more valuable than monetary gains. Monetary gains can close the gap on time. So if you're curious, when people say, a lot of veteran players and legacy players would say, like, oh yeah, but I don't want this game to be pay to win, because like I don't want them to encroach on my legacy. Well, no one can encroach on your legacy. You played this game for 10 years. They would have to have started when you started to beat you in legacy. Legacy is the ultimate pay to win. You pay with your time. Time is the most it's arguably an intractable form of value. So what is harder than pay to win in live service? Neverwinter. Their design is based on legacy. You can't enter a game. Like, it's far harder to enter a pay-to-win. It's harder to enter a game like Neverwinter than it is to enter a game that's pay-to-win. It's like the ultimate form. Like, for example, if you want to get a job, right? Your boss is someone who works longer than you. Like, have worked in the job longer than you. Period. That's it. How can you catch up when your boss quits or retires? That's your only option. At least pay to win allows the person who is coming in to incentivize and transfer their value as a human being to offset legacy. Nepotism is far superior and uncontested than having merit through resources. That person who paid for that money, like paid for that service and stuff, they're successful elsewhere. It's equivocating merit. So if this person has a lot of money, they're getting it from somewhere. It's better than assuming a person who played 10 years automatically is better than the person that didn't. Like, or more valuable. Again, ideally there's another step down, which is meritocracy, right? The meritocracy is neither pay to win nor nepotistic. Unfortunately, since we're, you know, linear time creatures, it's very difficult for us to separate from nepotism, right? And it's kind of hard to separate from monetary gains too. And then even below that is meritocracy. It's the easiest to separate merit. It's next easiest to separate monetary gain. And then is the even less than that is legacy. So when YouTube, like if you look at a YouTube comment section, if the default qualification that most people rely on is their legacy, because no longer is someone's success, which is often monetary, is sufficient to convince someone. And then even before that, it's hard to demonstrate someone's merit, right? You can't just say, oh, I did a great job here, so I disagree. That's really easily counter-argued. And then you could say, well, I made a lot of money and I'm very successful. That's more difficult to disagree with. And then you have, as an engineer for 30 years, I think this, then it's even harder to counter-argue the person. And for me, none of that is impressive. I do not. It can be all of the above and more. The GOAT for me, the requirement for me, is beyond that. It's mutual respect. If you have mutual respect, that circumvents pretty much all of the other three. Like, your status is irrelevant if I respect you. Your merit is irrelevant. Like, I don't need those things. If we have mutual respect, we have mutual respect. You can't go beyond that. And mutual respect comes in many forms. Acknowledging that the other person is a human being, not how long they've worked a job, not how much money they have, and not how many good deeds they made. It's all of it. Like, all of it defines, and more defines, a human being. So if you can establish mutual respect from all the things they tell you immediately, that is an unbreakable bond. And the Neverwinter community and Cryptic do not have a mutual respect of each other. It's so difficult to accept that they have, the community and the developer in this game has a mutual respect for each other. It's crazy. You don't have to aim for that though. It's really not necessary. All this stuff is just icing and idealism. I'm talking about idealistic and naive concepts. In reality, it's somewhere like in between money and nepotism. Like money and legacy is usually where it happens. I don't quite have an example off the top of my head that there's this mutual respect. I feel the closest thing I have is a game I play called Osu. Epi and the community, the product, the community that it spawned is incredibly close to that. It could also be familial, right? But familial is not interpersonal between anyone. Familial is very specific. So you can go even deeper, but they're rarer and rarer cases. Like familial can go even beyond mutual respect. It becomes unconditional. So the goat of everything at the very end is unconditional. And that's usually reserved for your significant other, your child, you know, your family, maybe even someone who's gone through adversity with you. Like brothers and sisters and siblings, right? I don't know why I said brothers and sisters and siblings. I don't know if there's any other siblings. Anyways, that's the sentiment. This game is the third form. It's legacy. Legacy carries its development. Legacy carries the choices made and whatnot. And the higher you go up, the harder and harder it is to break into the circle. If you have unconditional bonds and that's all your cutoff is, you only have family members, siblings, and your best friends. That's it. No one else can enter your circle at that level. If you're in Legacy, anyone who hasn't been here for a very long time, basically all the casual players and the people that need to join this game, like you're trying to track those, they are already immediately excluded from the discussion. Pay to win, anyone who is new, who also is willing to spend, is included now, which is still greater than a legacy build. And then the very last one, remove all legacy and pay to win and make it a merit-based system. Then you have a live service game that's sustainable on growth. It does not have that. This game does not have that. It's somewhere in between getting close to pay to win. It's a combination of pay to win philosophy, not like literal the contemporary standards of pay to win. It's the philosophy of having resources and legacy. So the longer you play, the more resources you have, the more likely you stay with the game. It does not cater to someone who just comes in and is like, if I pay you $50, can I be part of legacy? $50 doesn't cover legacy because these guys are making trials and dungeons that only cater on the feedback of legacy players. So obviously the feedback and stuff will excommunicate whoever even is willing to pay $50 to join the club in the first place. And they do offer that payment to get closer to the club. What does a meritocracy look like in a live service game? The next module, everyone's gear is reset. That's a meritocracy. Will that happen? Oh heck no. I think they might as well just make a new game, right? That's when it gets a little too deep. If that system, if a meritocracy is not already established in a game, it's usually more lucrative and pragmatic to start a new game. Just start a new game. Diablo is a great way to integrate both of these. You have legacy on the one hand, but then the seasonal events, right? The seasonal events is a meritocracy, as in the progress and stuff is reset technically every season. The most sustainable model that is the most popular are PvP games. They are closest to a meritocracy than anything. And they always struggle between the relationship between pay to win and meritocracy because they're next to each other. Neverwinter is on the other side. It's between legacy and pay to win. I don't think in any of its lifespan did Neverwinter ever form the basis of a meritocracy in video games. Some might casually argue when it had PvP, but that is grasping at straws, because I was there. You know, I'm using my legacy now. PvP was not a meritocracy in this game originally. Not even in its original form, because there was no normalization for gear. There was no normalization for seasons. The reputation and profiles were persistent. There's no reset. So it was never an, you know, when you were there first, you already had an advantage. It's kind of like the old school World of Warcraft stuff, like Blood Gulch and stuff. When I was playing in vanilla, you brought your legacy into the PvP component originally. But Blizzard did stick with their guns, and they eventually kind of like turned that into a separate thing. And then, what Cryptic did was just abandon it. So that's a fair way of just, you know, ripping the band-aid off, right? All this stuff fits so neatly. It's worth to disclaim, right? This stuff fits neatly because I'm painting a narrative. I mean, like, I've talked about this a lot, and I've seen this a lot, and it wasn't in video games. It was in education. This was most vivid when I was in high school, when I was first exposed to a ranking system, right? My high school had a ranking system, so it's not a big stretch. In fact, the school ranking system has far more moving parts and complexity than a video game's ranking system. And then what is the next ranking system? Your job. When you go into careers and have peer review and all those things, they have ranking systems. They're just very, very complicated to understand, and a large majority of people prefer to just do their best and hope the ranking system is in their favor. Video game ranking systems like gear score and completion stuff and whatnot, that's an incredibly rudimentary way of... It's a great opportunity to practice how you respond and adapt to rating systems, though. And I think there's room for making competitive games be a incredible learning experience for a more dynamic system, like life, like adapting to life. It'll be an uphill battle for sure. It's also the fairness, right? If you're looking at fairness, draw an association with fairness. A meritocracy is the most fair, right? Relatively speaking. Pay to win is even less fair. Legacy is even less fair. And then unconditional is just completely partial. Like just 100% partial. Like the person you have an unconditional relationship with, it's literally 100% or 99.99% giving extenuating circumstances. So when you're talking about the fairness of a game system, and you have Neverwinter players saying how pay to win is less fair than what they have now, I find it very difficult to even wrap the logic around how that, like, explain it logically how that is true. Legitimately, pay to win is far fairer than the system that Neverwinter has right now. You can't beat Legacy with pay to win. So inherently, if they introduce pay to win, more players will play the game. That's the irony here. More players will play the game, and the people who have Legacy will continue to be on top. The game will make more money, have more people, and the people at the top will continue to profit. That is the reality, not some romantic gesture about give us meritocracy or give us death when the game can't even support a pay-to-win model. Those are stepping stones. Those are big stepping stones. You're leaping over pay-to-win to get to meritocracy, or the people who are very vocal, right? There are some vocal people are saying like, oh yeah, why don't we just get rid of these things and get rid of these things? It should be about skill and like not loyalty. It should not be about how long you played this game. It should be instantly that everyone be on level playing field. Yeah. How do you get closer to that? Make the game pay to win. Eventually the gap will close. Will I be the person paying to win? Well, no, because I'm part of the legacy group, right? So I'm obviously not paying for it. It doesn't make me any more skilled. Alternatively, Cryptic can just reset everyone's gear. That I don't even want to entertain how big of a gap that is. It's crazy. I say it with a smile, I guess, but it's a real big deal when you speak to certain people who legitimately attach their well-being and the relationships they have with other people to a video game. And then it's super serious. Like, it can be everything to them. So I don't want to make it look like I'm an uncaring person. I just can't empathize with that. My relationship with other people go beyond a video game. Some people might say that, and yet they react so violently when their game is threatened. Like, quote unquote, their game is threatened. This isn't my game. It's Cryptic's game. It's a lot of people's game. It's an accumulation of whoever is still playing this game. If it becomes your game, then I like to hope that when this game disappears, you have somewhere else to give your life some significance. Filling in the void, guys. Filling in the void. Neverwinter makes me think of these things because it's a legacy game. It makes me think of all the time and experiences that I had over the years. A great place to reflect. It's also the end of the year. The New Year's is around the corner. We're almost there. Almost there. These are the tough ones. The big streams. I might not even qualify this as a digression. I don't think this is a digression. This is part of the Neverwinter experience for me. But we won't like emphasize that. This is the Neverwinter. This is my Neverwinter experience. If there are people out there, for whatever reason, for whatever weird reason, curious what I think about when I play Neverwinter, like, you know, if they don't see me stream Neverwinter, say, like, every other time when there isn't a new module and stuff, what do I think about when I am bootstrapping for, like, the 100th time through Neverwinter, right? The 8th week. I mean, it's not like I'm engaging myself in the actual task of doing this, right? Like, I'm barely looking at the screen doing this. I'm looking at something else. I spend my time thinking about all the things I can talk about. And actually, most of the stuff I talk about in other video games, when I'm playing other video games, came from me playing live service games. So whenever I'm playing like PSO2, NGS, and Neverwinter, since it's not really intellectually engaging mechanically, right? Like, I'm not actually engaging in a lot of that. It gives me time to brainstorm and practice. So this spiel that I just gave is actually kind of new in a little sense. It's old and new. A lot of it after the whole SciShow thing is technically old. The SciShow thing was new. So I'm like rehearsing. And live service games are a way that I ruminate about it. It's very meditative, right? I'm not really paying attention to what I'm doing on screen, by the way, so it's very, very low input. Like, if I'm gonna queue up for a random dungeon or like do Defense of the Moon Dancer again and again and hope that like the heckin' traditional looting system will give me something, then I'm actually thinking about like psychology and life and all that stuff. That's usually what happens. It alleviates my boredom. So most of my it's a funny way to look at it. I haven't really voiced this before. Most of my ideas and whatnot comes from when I'm not really intellectually engaged in doing something. So this is more, I think I've said this before. Neverwinter, a live service game, is more of a fidget spinner. It's more of a fidget spinner where it keeps me focused, where it keeps my thoughts focused on something while accomplishing something, right? I'm technically accomplishing my tasks, the weekly hauls and stuff. It's kind of like running. Like when I'm running, I'm not focused on the act of running. I'm actually using running as a meditative state to brainstorm about things. When I was running today, I was coming up with this spiel right here. And then now I'm playing Neverwinter and I'm practicing this spiel literally to myself, generally speaking. And then if that leads to an interaction with a stranger, then I get to practice something else, right? So it's always maximizing, where we're constantly doing something. The time when I'm not doing anything and I'm not learning anything is when I'm sleeping. Or dead, but usually sleeping. Sometimes I have lucid dreams, and those lucid dreams can become inspiration, but most of the time I don't have too many lucid dreams lately. I sleep pretty well these days, actually. My sleep hygiene has improved quite dramatically. trying to think of what I can say about Astral Dust. I think Astral Dust and Squid Medallions need to heckin' get a drop rate increase. It's not just the aberrations. Squid Medallions and Astral Dust kind of suck too. Yeah, like, look at this. Not a single Astral Dust. I more or less completed my thoughts for today. Gonna rest the old voice. Getting a little sandy, a little coarse. It takes them a while to engage. the Kuatoa. Yep. This is my Neverwinter experience after week 4. There's pretty much nothing else to talk about, really. It's about the average experience. This is a pretty average experience in general. Why are... Dude. It took him like 8 billion years to engage. What the heck? By 8 billion years, I mean like 1 minute. Astro Dust. I tell you. Astro Dust. You have to wait. Okay, that was a great haul right there, though. Rescue prisoners. Is this Valoria? No, it's not. Oh. Okay. The hamster. I didn't get a hamster this time. Maybe I'll buy a hamster. Sure. I love the hamster running animation. That guy's on a giant hamster. Hey, yeah. It's so cute. Sorry. I broke my doom and gloom persona. I already opened lockboxes. We didn't get it this time. It's all good. You just buy it then. Oh no. I was actually banking on completing this before 9 p.m. I guess it's fine. 9 p.m. Local time. Is that guy name mob? Heck. Are you stuck? I'm just gonna grab this, please. Alright. See ya. Yep. Definitely just use my mound power. Somehow stayed in combat. I think this is the last one. So we're almost done. Okay. That wasn't so bad, was it? Oh, wait. Never mind. I've got to rescue the mercs. Wait. Are we at 1? Oh no, we're at 2. Gee. Okay. Okay. There's still one more set. No. Just to integrate what I said, like the story that I was trying to convey earlier. Why does it matter to me, for example, why does it matter to me that I have to record myself completing the weekly haul with all 3 tunes? It's because I wanted to keep something for myself, right? If I don't do it and record it, right? I won't be able to remember it the way it is. And then the thoughts I had. So I especially prepared something to talk about today, largely to myself, and maybe to the occasional person who's inspired to spin their own take on this idea of live service models. Because complete the weekly haul. That's not like the literal completion of the weekly haul. It's very bottom of the barrel. Like it doesn't really offer that much value. What I make of it is high in value. I've got an opportunity to practice a spiel, quote unquote spiel, that I will most definitely practice later on. So this is like I guess what I could say about week 8 of Spelljammer is that if anyone ever watches me play Neverwinter, they'll have a tease of what's going on in my mind, because this spiel that I'm working on is going to be important in February when I start learning languages for the year 2024. Actually, overall, I think I need to, yeah, we need to do this last round. So let's do this last round. I always have a plan. Always thinking. Thinking how to maximize things while it doesn't seem like I'm maximizing things. Why play Neverwinter when you can play Neverwinter, use it as a source of inspiration, think about other things, practice that during Neverwinter while also playing, right? Come on, why settle with just playing Neverwinter? Why settle with just doing anything specific? If you're feeling good, life is your oyster, and you have the privilege, like myself, have the privilege to tackle many things. Might as well seize the opportunity. I mean, one day I like to hope that I could actually share some of this stuff in retrospect to other people. You know, things I've learned over the years, maybe things I've abandoned in another 5 years or so down the road. Who knows? It will be excellent, regardless. I might have forgotten it, and one day it might be the thing to my own salvation. Maybe my 50-year-old self need to understand what my 30-year-old self was like, because I was who knows, in 50 years, and when I become 50, I might become some miserable person who learned so much that they've lost motivation in capturing that same, you know, the feeling or something, an inspiration. And I look back on this and be able to extract what I need from it at a later time. I like to think that can be possible. Largely why I encourage people to journal write or keep a food diary. It's a way to reflect, not to capture the same emotions. It's to use it, breathe more value to something you might have forgotten. I can't tell you, you know, I literally can't tell you how you'll feel when one day an experience you have forgotten but written down inspires and rekindles your interest in your own life. You know, if there isn't anyone else who can possibly understand you, how poetic would it be that the person that could help you was you from 30 years ago? You never know. I mean, obviously, ideally, I wouldn't ever want someone to have to rely on that. The idea is to have people around you who have shared enough with you, with your own personal life and story and stuff, that they themselves are a version of you, like your journal, right? But if you don't have that luxury and you need to be alone and you're just a really big loner, it's time. Grab that journal. Your younger self could ironically be more wiser than your older self in some ways. So don't let that go. Whenever I talked about today about the whole memory is dynamic and stuff, and preservation being painted as potentially something undesirable, it's not. It's both. The idea is preservation is excluding thinking that your brain is dynamic. You can do both. Use technology. And I don't mean like recording and stuff. You can use a paper and pencil. A paper and pencil is just as sufficient. Create art. Start a garden. Plant a tree. Dare I say, find someone you love and start a family. Right? Obviously, all these things are pretty extreme, but you can start with the paper and pencil. The stuff I'm describing now, I'm quite literally doing and participating with them. Like 3 or 4 people. They're quite young too. Usually it's older, like in my generation, I would say if someone is still struggling with what I'm discussing now and they're in the 30s, like in my age, I would be a little bit concerned. Like it would be very concerning if someone is still struggling with the things I'm encountering from strangers. Maybe acquaintances now. And then some friends, right? It absolutely breaks my heart when someone tells me that their life is boring and not worth sharing. Although I don't really voice it in that way. I just ask them questions. And hopefully that maybe I can give them the impression that at least it's interesting to me. Anyone can do that. I really earnestly believe anyone can quite significantly change a stranger's direction in life by just giving them the impression that someone cares. And you don't have to pretend, obviously. Asking questions may make you interested. You never know. As the person asking the questions, you can treat it as a challenge for yourself. How dynamic are you at adjusting to different people's stories? How worldly are you? Pick up the challenge. If you truly think you're worldly and open-minded, challenge yourself. Ask them questions and add to their story. If you can't, you practiced. You practiced and it will lead to more things. You can call it naive too, right? Like I am pretty naive. I'm sappy. Like I mentioned a couple of times. I want to find meaning where there isn't, because the people I talk to that I'm trying to find meaning in feels like their life is meaningless or it's not worth sharing. So yeah, you bet, Mr. Stranger Online, that I am very, very good or constantly trying to find meaning when there isn't meaning. Because if I don't see meaning and this person is telling me their life is meaningless, who's gonna find it? You can't inspire someone to find meaning in their life by saying how meaningful your life is. That is incredibly obtuse and insensitive. If you have meaning in your life, you don't even need to say it. You can just demonstrate it. When you talk to a stranger and they're like, yeah, it's uneventful, you know, but it's Christmas. Come on, try me. I quite literally said those words just recently during Christmas, yesterday, when someone, you know, went about and said, yeah, you know, it's just normal stuff. It's not that interesting. Try me. Really, go ahead, try me. Try to make it sound as boring as possible. Do it. At least you're trying, right? Sometimes even trying to be boring can be a little bit more engaging than actually believing it's boring to a stranger. There's always a way around. Gotta make people care about their lives. like my heart legitimately feel when I talk about these things. I could legitimately bring myself to tears thinking that some people go around, you know, 18 years old, like their adulthood is about to start, and suddenly they just decide that nothing in their life matters. That's incredibly unfortunate. And not even in a serious way. Like, what I mean is, they're coping really effectively. They're incredibly great at coping with it. And that's even scarier. When someone can cope and just say that, like, yeah, you know, this isn't worth sharing. Like, I decided to eat something new, but it's not worth sharing, you know. This is just the normal stuff. If you can trivialize something like that and be okay with it, that's a really early sign. Like, that's an early sign to the point where you can't, as an adult, right? If you're a guardian, you can't even know if they're upset or not. They don't even know if they're upset or not. Like, eventually they'll be like, I have no idea why I'm unmotivated. I don't either. Because you normalized it so much that I can't even tell if you're upset anymore. So that's kind of the scare stuff. That's really scary. So no more of that. I really hope uh there are some content creators that I'm aware of. Absolutely. Like, man, uh I don't remember his name. Oh yeah, I do remember his name. Like, shout outs to, I'm gonna do one shout out that I've loved recently, and that's and he's really popular, so I'm sure some of you youngins are at least those all those like aspiring computer science people or people who are into video games. Pirate Software, right? Thor, that guy. I'm glad someone like I'm really happy that someone like him exists, right? Because if I'm not gonna say something, like if no one's gonna hear what I have to say because it's too long and I don't give hot takes and whatnot, at least someone like that guy can say something in like 50 seconds or less and sway a bunch of kids to like, dude, go out, make mistakes. Like, make mistakes when you can. Make mistakes safely. Learn initiatively to intentionally know the risk and rewards and take the low risk mistakes. Try things. Preserving things is great and all, but when you're really happy and you're like on cloud 9, it's a beautiful time to try and see what works out. Things that don't work out, they might feel like mistakes, but they are also practice. So if you intentionally make a mistake or intentionally set yourself up to be prone to make mistakes, they're no longer mistakes. It's called practice, right? It's the euphemism kids are familiar with. When you go out to practice, you are actively making mistakes. It just doesn't seem like a mistake because you're not making a decision making. You're not engaged in a really critical, permanent decision making yet. So go out and practice. That's the idea, right? Practice making your life sound less boring. When a stranger asks you how your life is, practice expressing how boring it is. I mean, at minimum, you could explain why it's boring, right? Some people might be thinking, that's outrageous. They probably just complain and stuff. It's like, no, kids don't even do that anymore. Like, there was a time when kids complain about how boring it is. Like, they actually say how angrily boring it is, or like what is making them bored. Nowadays, you just have someone who says it's boring, you get it. It's like, no, I don't get it. Can you express it to me? And it just says like, well, it's boring. Like, I don't. It's very fun. It can be very fun and very self-aware and healthy to practice even explaining why you hate something or why you dislike something. Those are constructive things, right? If you know why you hate something, you can become constructive in it. It will probably start off as some emotional outburst and some projection of just crude prejudice, right? However, over time, that will refine in itself, and that act will be a tool they can use to carry on into adulthood. Like, they will be able to be realistic with themselves. They will be able to suck it up and become stronger people and stuff like that. If you don't practice that at all, then you just don't have the tools at all. I don't think this is like some natural born instinct or something that special people have and other special people don't have. There's one thing that makes life unfair: when the opportunities are not there. So when you don't have the opportunity to practicing mistakes, then you don't ever get that opportunity. When you see an opportunity to do that, it's always worth a little bit of, ambivalence and fear to get your feet wet. Go out and take a risk at eating something that is disgusting or possibly very questionable when you are the most happiest. I understand how ironic that is. A lot of times one would say, oh yeah, I'm having a great day. I don't want to ruin the great day. Well, let's think about it in the span of your life, right? Do you want to make a bad day worse? Or a good day possibly better or worse? Like, so the fear of ruining your good day is still going to pan out more than a bad day getting ruined by something you didn't even do yet, like that you didn't practice. So when you're having a really good day, pick a challenge. Do a challenge, because you're up for it. You are in your best condition to take a challenge. That is something I think it's timeless. It's a logic that is great, because when you practice something, when you go and like practice football or play a video game, oftentimes you're thinking about you in your best mindset. Well, you can apply that to life. And there's a lot of life skills where if you're really exhausted and can't talk to people, don't talk to people. When you're really excited and happy now, it's a great time to try to talk to someone. It will most definitely dampen your mood. However, in the long run, you will be ready when you need to talk to someone, right? So, what is my 2 cents here? When me, as a stranger, like as a streamer who has very little audience, and you, potential stranger, my friend, my future friend, or perhaps, when you ask me a question and I'm already a streamer that doesn't have an audience, right? Like, doesn't have a lot of audience, this is one of those ideal moments that if I ask you a question, you could say anything. You could practice anything. You wouldn't know what would happen. You could make me angry. You could make me uncomfortable. You can make me excited. But at least I can give you the opportunity to do something that isn't maybe your boss. Like, imagine now that since you didn't take this opportunity to interact with a relatively available stranger that is really literally obligated to interact because they're publicly streaming something, you go into an interview and you wonder why you couldn't answer or be so nervous about answering questions about your life and your experiences in an interview to your potential boss, like your future boss. Well, you had trouble interacting with me, a random stranger who's literally obligated to probably entertain you in some way. That's where you start. At least start there, right? If you have a sibling, you probably start there too. So my take on, like, for 2024, maybe like a message for 2024, all the hopeful little youngins out there, or maybe even adults that are really stuck in their own ways, like want to stay the same all the time. I would challenge them, if they are really comfortable with their own skin, step out of it. I bet you're not as comfortable as you think. I don't think someone who's dynamic, successful, and adaptive ever feels comfortable. Because they don't. I don't ever keep myself in a comfortable state long enough to feel comfortable. There is a risk of imposter syndrome, for sure. I absolutely agree. Some people actually call me out on it quite a lot sometimes. Like, no, like, that's selling yourself short. And I'm like, that's understandable. However, I like to keep myself in an uncomfortable state. People who are the most confident, competent, and successful are those who constantly keep themselves just in that edge of uncomfortability, because it makes them the most challenged all the time. They are willing to take a challenge when they are most comfortable. So if you're sitting pretty on top of a throne, thinking that you're the best at something, you're probably not as comfortable as you think you are. And you're probably not as competent as you think you are. Because you spend most of the time in a small pond, in a small world, adapting and refining a single skill. That's fair. If that skill is like making money, then the world's your oyster, I suppose. It doesn't make you more competent. It just makes you way more specialized in that one skill. So, even those people, when they make it to the top, they're gonna want to expand and leave their comfort zone. You know, even Elon Musk moves on to other ventures once he finds it's comfortable to move on, right? So, I mean, granted, you see that he takes risks and makes mistakes too, or potential controversial mistakes, I suppose. Controversial moves. Not many successful human beings, consistently happy human beings, ever stay static, even till the end of their days. If you found closure and you're like in your 60s and 70s and you'd be like, yeah, you know, I've experienced all life has to offer. Fair enough. Absolutely. If you're asking me, I'm going to leave this message to my 80-year-old self. Maybe in 80 years, I'll still be able to see this like video. I am going to bet my 80-year-old self that when I'm 80, I will still have this same perspective. That I won't stop being uncomfortable. The moment I get too comfortable, I get bored. And when I get bored, I stop being of value to myself and to other people. And when you become bored with yourself, you can't possibly project value to any other person. And it is up to luck and the universe to put you in touch with someone who can breathe value back into your life. It could be you. It could literally be you from 40 years ago. You write in that journal, say like, you're the best thing. In 10 years, I hope to be this thing. You write that in your journal and come back to it in 10 years. Right? That, it could be you. But just as a word for 2024, hopefully, maybe we'll still be playing Neverwinter, right? Yeah. Seize the opportunity. You're sick? You're gonna head out? Came out of nowhere. It's okay. Scoop. Take care of yourself. Stay safe. Like, get something for that. Alright, folks, that's a wrap for week 8 of Neverwinter Spelljammer module. Nothing has changed. No patches. No nothing. So, and the experience is more or less the same. So it's a 5 out of 5. I mean, 5 out of 5. 5 out of 10. It's just your average experience. I hope embellishing it with a story and an anecdote that I'm practicing on, you'll probably hear a more refined version of it in the future. This is the first, like, practice of it. Hopefully someone found it a little bit fun to listen to, or the ramblings of a 10-year-old plus Neverwinter player, I suppose. I mean, like, I'm not 10 years old, but I mean, I have a 10-year tenure in Neverwinter. Hopefully that is a little bit more enjoyable than watching someone bootstrap through Neverwinter, right? Alright, folks. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for listening. Yeah. Definitely, you're always welcome to share, comment, discuss your life lesson. Or things. Maybe something that live service taught you about yourself. Or perhaps something I talked about when it comes to the youth and adults' minds, right? As always, until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, keep on learning. Actively practice taking risks, but in a safe manner, right? That sounded kind of oxymoronic, but anyways. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, keep on working at it. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Take care. Bye now.